Madam Web is the latest installment of the SUMC, that is the Sony universe of Marvel characters, which Sony have called themselves their Spider-Man villain stories. I prefer the term coined by the Weekly Planet podcast, the Sony Pictures universe of Marvel movies, which is just SPUMM. Because I feel like that's a better word for what it is this universe, this franchise consists of, instead of SUMC. It consists of SPUMM. What's this one about? Well, there's a character named Madam Web in the comics, and once again, Sony, the creative teams at Sony, are trying to figure out how to form a Sinister Six movie, but they're also trying to make, like, anti-hero movies. They're trying to make movies out of their villains, and the only thing they can think of is to make them heroes. So now we have Madam Web, a character that isn't too famous of, like, the famous Spider-Man characters. People know of them, maybe. But in this case, what they have done here is they have Dakota Johnson playing Cassandra Webb. She's a little younger than how Madam Web is usually in the comics. Doesn't matter because it's kind of an origin story, I get it. But she's living in New York. She works as an EMT. One day after a near-death incident, she starts having visions of the future, things that are literally going to happen in the next couple seconds. Very similar to the Nicolas Cage Next Powers, if you've ever seen that one. It's fine. And after a couple visions, she starts to really focus in on this man named Ezekiel Sims, who is going to be killing these 3 teenage girls who are also crossing paths with her. She doesn't know why, but she wants to try to help because that's what she does. So now these 4 women are on a path of, beating up Ezekiel Sims if they can. I'm just gonna be totally honest with you guys. If you're familiar with some of the other reviews I've done, like for Morbius, for example, or Venom, you probably knew already that I wasn't really that excited going in, and you'd be correct. Yeah, as soon as they announced it, I was like, well, yeah, I kind of know at this point what to expect with what they are doing in their corner of the Marvel universe, if it even connects to what Disney is doing. They try to connect them, but are they even going to? Who fucking knows what their plan is? When the trailer came out, I was like, oh yeah, this just seems to kind of confirm a lot of my fears as far as like what this could be. It seems like that's what they're doing. But I do want to just make it known, like, I didn't go into this movie wanting to hate it. It's impossible in this day and age of technology and social media to avoid what early response was. But I did not go into this movie thinking like, all right, time to, find everything that's wrong with this. I want to enjoy movies that I see. I want to find the good in things. I feel like sometimes I get picked on by like my family because I'm like, well, this was okay. And they're like, why are you even giving it any kind of praise? And it's like, because I'm trying to find something here, you know what I mean? Even if I'm absolutely hating a movie, if there is something that I like about it or there's something redeemable, I do want to give some kind of praise to it. I'm saying all this just so you know, I'm not some biased hater, oh, Sony's making Marvel movies and they're not working directly with Disney to do it and that makes me mad, or I'm like a other end of the spectrum. I'm like a DC fan and I'm like, oh, I fucking hate anything Marvel. Or on the other end of that spectrum, I'm specifically a Zack Snyder comic book movie fan and I hate anything that he doesn't do. I'm not any of those things. I just want to see good movies. I grew up loving movies, not necessarily a specific comic brand. I say all this just so you know that I'm not being biased whatsoever when I say, yeah, this is another terrible addition to the SPUMM universe. And look, there are some small redeeming factors here, but they feel very fleeting, and I think that's one of my biggest problems with specifically these comic book movies that we're getting from Sony today. A lot of people are throwing around the terms like, it feels like a throwback to an era of comic book films that we don't get anymore, like the early 2000s, Ang Lee Hulk, or Daredevil or Catwoman Elektra, like that kind of era of comic book movie. And yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Back when Venom first came out in 2018, when I thought that was the worst that you could do, little did I know that Venom was somehow going to be the best fucking thing in the SPUMM universe. But back when that came out, I was like, yeah, this just feels like the kind of movie that a studio would have made in the early 2000s without really understanding a lot of the core elements of the character, a lot of how they've been utilized and what people would have been really excited to see if you were going to make a movie out of them. They then did the same thing with Morbius, very dull, lifeless, kind of like borderline incompetent kind of movie. And then you have it again with Madam Web. I would say if I had to rank them, the 2 Venom movies are at the top. And then Madam Web is like slightly above Morbius. Morbius is that movie where it's like, it's so dull, where it's like, it's a chore to sit through. Whereas Madam Web, it's awful in so many ways, but there is like a little bit of personality that tries to like snake its way in. Morbius has nothing. and Madam Web has just dashes of like, hey, I like the practical costumes that they're wearing. You know, I think they got picked on for looking too CW, but it's like, at least they're actually in the fucking suits as far as I can tell. Like, you know, they put some work into designing these costumes and the look, and, you know, they tried to capture the era of the early 2000s. You could see a couple references to that, like in the product placement and the way they've like designed some of the set. It's like, okay, they're trying to capture this era, and they've done it pretty well with the practical effects. Every once in a while, there's an odd line that's delivered in such a way where, you know, the theater was starting to laugh a bit, and so was I. You know what I mean? Like, every once in a while, there's a line read where it's like, there's some life. There's some life, or it's some kind of rhythm, you know, that I can, like, get on board with that isn't just everything else that's going on here. Looking back on it, the best summation of how the movie's going to turn out is just watching, like, the first 2 minutes of the movie, like the opening scene, where you get the backstory of the... He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died. You know, that line's not in the movie, by the way. Don't worry, there's a lot of other bad lines, and we'll talk about that specifically in a bit. But that opening scene does a really great job of painting the picture of the rest of the film you're about to receive. You know, you have some really poor acting, some poor dialogue, some choppy editing during a shootout moment in the opening scene, and some really weird cinematography where the action that you are looking at, it's hard to kind of like track as far as like what's happening, because they're doing so many weird things to chop it up, and it's like, I am not having a good time here. There's something about this dialogue too, and I can't confirm this. It's basically me just, you know, theorizing just based off of what I saw, what I heard, and I know that there's like at least 5 screenwriters on this thing. 2 of them worked on Morbius. But I do wonder if there were certain lines that were come up with by AI, because there's certain lines of dialogue where I'm like, that is weird. You know what I mean? Not weird in like a, oh, they said a weird thing, just a sentence structure. You know, grammatically speaking, there's something wrong with it, and the actor doesn't seem like they even know how to salvage it. It's very bizarre. I'm not trying to say ChatGPT wrote Madam Web. Not that, you know, not that many people would, you know, easily dismiss that. I'm sure a lot of people would very willingly embrace that theory. Like, oh yeah, for sure. Have you seen the movie? So the opening scene really does have everything that then comes to follow. Specifically, I want to highlight really quickly before we get into anything else. Tahar Rafim, he plays Ezekiel Sims in the movie, and look, I'm not trying to diss on actors just because I thought their performance was weird or because of the character they play. The actors, they're there to do a job, and, you know, after what we just saw with the strikes as well, you know, they don't always have it easy. You know, the elitist of Hollywood celebrities, they're fine, but there's a lot of actors who are not like A-list status, who just, they do a job because they need the money, they need to live. I'm not trying to diss on an actor just for their work. You know, they try their best. So I just want you guys to know, by me specifically mentioning this actor, I'm not trying to like bully him or anything like that, but there are elements of this character that we have to kind of talk about. 2 things in particular. The first thing, for every other line that he says that sounds like, you know, normal, whatever, I mean, normal for this movie, there's another line that then sounds off. Something about the delivery doesn't match what you're looking at. And it's, you know, some people may not even catch on to it right away, but the movie, it continues with this botched ADR job where the lips don't match up, the inflection doesn't match up what you're seeing, how he's performing the action on screen of delivering the line. You know, it feels like they have reworked this character in some way. They've given him new lines of dialogue, or there's a performance change later on, like, oh, actually, we would prefer it if you did it more like this, and then they did it all in ADR. I don't know what, but it was baffling. Almost every single damn thing this character said sounded like it came from post-production. And that is weird. The other weird thing isn't actually all that weird, it's just that he's poorly written. He's a very atrocious villain. At the very least, in Morbius, if I have to give Morbius anything, Matt Smith is at least, like, doing this goofy-ass thing that's like, okay, he's the one thing that's trying to do something fun and memorable with this while everyone else is kind of coasting. That is not the case with this performance. The way that they have directed this actor is just... I mean, the ADR thing is one thing, but just the way they've directed it itself is like, most of the time he's in a costume and he's chasing after them. Maybe he'll beat up some of the extras that are in the scene, but then, you know, Cassie Webb finds a way to knock him out, whether it's with a car or with a car or a firework. It's like, there's so many, it gets very repetitive. There's so many parts where Ezekiel Sims in his, inverse Spider-Man costume, whatever, he starts going after him, he's gonna get him, and then he gets knocked out of the way. It's like, well, of course you have to, because Cassie Webb's powers are just seeing into the Nicolas Cage next powers. It's not anything like Spider-Man related. And the 3 Spider Women that Ezekiel Sims sees in his vision, they don't have powers yet, so you're basically seeing 4 normal people just being chased by a guy with Spider-Man-esque powers. And how do you make action scenes, how do you make thrilling sequences work out of that? Because I've seen some comparisons to like Terminator, like, oh, it's like that, you have Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor on the run from the Arnold Terminator. I would say execution-wise, that is much different, you have this like stalking giant man who's got a robot skeleton inside, hunting them down, mostly using like a lot of guns. There is maybe a scenario where you can like tackle him, but he's also like a human being, he doesn't do like incredible shit like jumping from rooftops or like or like touching you causes poison or some shit like that. Ezekiel Sims is like way more like overpowered. So execution wise, James Cameron had like a better handle on like, here's how we're gonna make this scene entertaining, here's how we're going to get you on the edge, and here's how we're going to top ourselves. And then this movie, it doesn't really have that same sense of like a proper escalation of like of properly building up a scene, of like finding clever ways for, okay, we have to outsmart him with just our intellect, our natural abilities, as opposed to any superpowers because we don't have it. It's just a lot of like the same. Knock him out with a car. And the funniest thing is that at first, when they're first giving Cassie her next powers, it's like, okay, they're showing it off in an interesting, like fun-ish way, but then as the movie keeps going, they don't push it as much as I thought. Like, we've seen movies that have like similar kind of concepts before with this, like Happy Death Day. Jessica Roth is doing multiple different things. She has to repeat, like, okay, that didn't work, let me try a different thing. Or even another Marvel thing that just happened, Loki, the way that finale, won't spoil too much about that, but the way he's kind of caught in a time loop and has to keep trying different things over and over and over again, because he's in a situation where he can't solve it by doing a laser blast or running away. He has to figure this out. They don't really push that kind of angle in this movie to make like those sequences more fun or more like, oh, that's how they're gonna get out. It's just a lot of same. And look, I'm not also trying to diss on the director of this film, S.J. Clarkson, because she's had a very long and very good career in television directing. This is her feature directorial debut, a chance to really shine and prove herself. Who wouldn't want this opportunity? I'm not trying to diss on her because she's also directed some good episodes of Marvel television, Defenders, Jessica Jones. She's worked on Succession. She's worked on Dexter. She's done some good TV work. But this movie, it very much so feels like we're just trying to get this over with. The budget, it sounds weird to say this about a movie with a budget of $80 million, but, that $80 million budget, it's not as high as some of the other comic book films we've gotten. They've tried to push this angle of like, it's a more grounded film. And I think what they really mean to say about that is like, yeah, it's a lot of people just running around in New York City, and there's not really a whole lot else to that. It feels weird to say that this movie that cost $80 million feels cheap. It feels like they're cutting corners just so they can get the shot and let's move on. Let's just get this out there so Sony can pay us because, let's face it, none of us want to be here. But that's what it felt like. It just felt like a let's just get this over with. For its sprinkling of like, ooh, that camera move, that was really fun. I wish they did a bit more of that to like enhance the fight scene that you're watching. Like, you'll have a sprinkling of that, but for the most part, it's just like kind of fairly generic kind of coverage, a fairly generic score to kind of accompany it. So it's not like, oh, I'm getting engaged, musically. It's like, no, it's typical, typical kind of fanfare, nothing to really write home about music-wise. And if the action is letting you down, if the music's letting you down, if the dialogue's letting you down, if the editing's letting you down, if performances are letting you down, if jokes are letting you down, surely maybe there's a good story here to accompany it. Sad to say, not really. Now, that's not to say that maybe they didn't have a good like jumping off point as far as like what they thought they were making. I think they definitely saw the uniting of these 4 characters and thinking like all 4 of these people have been abandoned or they're suffering a loss in their family. There's some kind of familial loss, and they kind of bond over that loss, whether it's a death or, in the case of some characters, they're just absent parents, or a parent is not currently in the picture, or they've been deported. It's like there's an interesting kind of like thematic connection for those characters that they could have really run with if you felt like they were actually like a family, if you actually felt like they were like closely bonding. And that is not really the case in this. You know, the three teenagers that Cassandra Webb is watching, you know, they have their quick little interactions of like, you know, Cassie going through her day and, oh, look, there's Sydney Sweeney over there. Oh, there's the part where she almost runs over Celeste O'Connor. And, oh, look, Isabel Merced is in that apartment she just walked by. And then the next time you see all three of them is the scene where she now has to engage in the rest of the film and start saving them. And then they, you know, talk for a bit about their backstories for one scene, and then they just kind of... I think my biggest thing is that you're watching these characters and they don't feel like they're going on any integral arcs. Not that you even really care about the characters that much to begin with. You understand that they're going to die. Ezekiel Sims is going to kill them because he fears them killing him in the future, for vague reasons that they never go over. But you understand why you think they should be important. But as far as like actually living with them, you know, actually getting to know them on some other level, you know, this is no James Gunn work. You know what I mean? Like, you're not watching Guardians of the Galaxy where you kind of understand all these characters have had rough pasts before, but they've come together and you've gotten to love them, and they're bantering back and forth, they're forming a good family, they're having like genuine moments with each other too. That's not really... It's like the most light version of that. And I think that's what I was hoping as the movie kept going, was like, hopefully these characters just show some kind of worth, like have some kind of like satisfying narrative payoff near the end. And all that really happens with them is Cassandra Webb leads them around and then tells them to duck, tells them to step over there. And they do. And Cassandra Webb is mostly doing... They just do whatever Cassandra Webb tells them to do. And they don't have any kind of like payoff to like, this is a thing we referenced earlier. This is something you never thought I would do. And once again, to mention James Gunn, is that in those Guardians movies, in those third acts, all of the characters have some kind of payoff each time. There's some kind of thing that they have built up that's coming back, whether you expected it or you didn't expect it this way. I mean, that's just screenwriting. This movie's idea of like a payoff with them is Cassandra Webb teaches them chest compressions, doing CPR, and then they just collectively do that near the end. Like, okay, now it's time to do the thing that we did earlier. And it's like, oh, see, the arc is complete. They properly did CPR. And then they end the movie, and any other like familial trauma isn't really completely absolved. The way they end this movie too is like total sequel bait, in a sense of like, I don't even know what you guys are thinking as far as like a sequel bait. Is this supposed to be a part of something? Are you truly doing your own thing? Is it even going to be a thing? What is going on? That happened a lot, not just because of the confusing coverage for the action scenes and the way they came together. It was like, I mean, yeah, that's another thing. It was like, what's going on? I can't track it. But like, what's going on narratively? And I can't really properly place what it is they were overall trying to say or do. There's some baffling narrative choices made. Like they do the thing earlier on where it's like, well, we have to have Cassandra Webb's options limited, so let's make her a fugitive. She's being framed for kidnapping these girls instead of helping them. But then later she's able to board a flight totally fine, apparently, and then like go from New York to the Amazon and then come back. It's like, no one stopped her. It really is like they shot that one bit at the beginning of their journey just so that you can give the illusion of like, ooh, some kind of pressure on our main character, but it doesn't really come back into play throughout. Like, there's only one other bit where they do a payoff with it, but it was like, why even do it? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel worth it. I think that's the biggest thing you could say about this movie and all of the choices they make, is that it doesn't feel worth it at the end of the day. You know, it doesn't feel like they're doing anything too different from what's been done a million times before and better. It doesn't feel like they're offering up an alternative experience from your usual comic book fare that is satisfying and unexpected. It just feels like they're making really bafflingly dumb, bad choices. I mean, there's a side character that's like aligned with Ezekiel Sims for some vague reason, who now has access to advanced technology that not everyone knows about yet, facial recognition software in 2003, and we're gonna track down these three people because I'm Ezekiel Sims and I have some kind of vague influence. I have some kind of vague regular person powers as opposed to my spider powers. Never gonna tell you what that is though. Do I run a business? Do I run the stock market? Have I invested? What do I do? I just am. He just is, you know, like narrative choices like that. And I can't really spoil this one, but there's a certain inclusion that at the end of the day is like, you didn't really need that. I understand why you think you might want that. I understand because we're going back in time. It's not current day. It's 2003. Why you think you might need to do that. But I'm telling you, that was totally unnecessary. I hope your takeaway here is that, like, I tried to give this movie some praise, and that I did see some decent things. Like, every once in a while, an actor will come to life and try to do something, and that's, you know, that alleviated the pain for like a brief second. That, you know, some of the practical effects that you're seeing are cool, or like a camera move that was interesting, or hey, maybe there was a narrative idea to kick this off that was cool. But as I also said earlier, a lot of these things feel fleeting. You know, I can point this out. You know, I can say like, well, they did this, or they were trying to do this. But does that really represent what I'm watching for an hour and 50-ish minutes? Not really, you know what I mean? It's easy to cherry pick things and be like, well, this was fun. Well, that was good. Like, oh, it's not that. But it's like, you're not watching it completely, you know, in its entire context if you're just cherry picking and just trying to hyper focus on like, well, they did oh my God, it's a complex bad movie because it's bad in ways you thought that like a lot of blockbusters were done being bad with, like stilted, awkward dialogue that feels ripped out of like that Happening / Last Airbender M. Night Shyamalan era. You know, like, how do they accomplish that? You know what I mean? Or like directing your actors in a way where it's like they have weird delays before they say the next thing. Even they don't seem convinced by the dialogue they're saying, you know? And man, Dakota Johnson, you know, she's a great actress. You know, I know a lot of people will give her flack for 50 Shades of Grey, but she, you know, she has done some quality work. The Lost Daughter, directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, she's good in that. Bad Times at the El Royale, she's a really good supporting player in that one. She's done some other good work. And I don't want 50 Shades to be what, like, defines her. But now I'm worried that Madame Web is what's going to be defining her for a while. And that sucks. Because, yeah, aside from, like, a few, like, oddball line reads where it's like, oh, that's, like, maybe Dakota Johnson was just trying to have fun with this one. For the most part, the performance just seems very, like, almost, like, lost, like, bewildered, like, not really sure what to do, you know, like, what emotion am I engaging with here? Like, it just seems very it feels like a very lost movie in so many ways. Like, they don't really know where they're going with this. I wish I could say that the chemistry between the three actresses playing the teenage girls were, you know, on point, or like, oh, that was a standout. They really brought this to life when they paired up with Kat. But they're not written to be characters. They're written as just objects, you know? They're the objects that Cassandra Webb is looking after, that Ezekiel Sims is after. But Ezekiel Sims isn't really written as a character. At the end of the day, I can at least say that this movie doesn't have the atrocious, like, Morbius, very confusing, worst, you know, nail on the coffin for that movie post-credit scenes. There are no post-credit scenes for this movie. So, good. There's no other attempts to, like, solidify, like, this is in the Andrew Garfield universe, or we're doing Disney, look, it's Michael Keaton. It's like, they're at least trying to do some kind of standalone thing. So hats off to them for not trying to, like, jump on the instinct of interconnected storytelling within these franchises, but the standalone story they're telling was ass. So I don't know what to say, man. I mean, the way, oh my gosh, I can't even, oh man, it's gonna be hard to describe this thing I'm saying without spoiling it, but there's something that they do where they resolve something where I was like, is it really that easy? Like, is it really that easy for what you've built up? Like, this is how you're ending it? Okay. Really makes me want a Pepsi. That's your clue for what I'm talking about. You'll probably know. I'm gonna give Madame Web a D. Like I said, there's a few fleeting things where I was like, I want to give praise to some work that was put into this. I hate to just, like, write something off as just, like, you know, oh, this is purely just a cash grab for these people. They, you know, they're just doing a job, you know? A lot of the times it is just a job, you know what I mean? So I don't want to dismiss people's, like, genuine hard work, whether or not they were, like, really into it or not. But I mean, when that kind of mindset seems to reflect in the final product of, like, whatever, just do it. I mean, even the way they picked S.J. Clarkson to direct this film, I'm not even positive it was she was really passionate about this character and her career has led her to this moment. I genuinely kind of feel like Sony was just like, well, who can we get? And then she was available and was like, oh, okay. And yeah, she's not like an established director, so she'll do whatever we want, you know? I feel like that's That's a lot of it. I mean, also, that's the thing, is that whoever you get to direct these movies, whether it's Andy Serkis, Ruben Fleischer, or Daniel Espinosa, it doesn't elevate the material you're getting in the SPUMM universe. So, yeah, it's just, we're caught in the Sony nightmare here, you know? I can't really recall the last time I felt this much secondhand embarrassment watching one of these big blockbusters since maybe Morbius. So there you go. If you want to go to a theater and endure secondhand embarrassment with a crowd, if you even get one, whenever you see this movie, if you even have a crowd, then be my guest. You'll have a good time. Can't wait for Kraven the Hunter. Delayed a whole year. Can't wait. Is El Muerto still happening? Are they ever going to make that one? Oh god, is this ever going to tie into the Tom Holland stuff? I kind of hope not. Anyways, guys, what did you think of Madam Web? If you've seen it, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.